Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to begin by thanking the authorities of the Foundation, Federalism and Liberty for giving me the Alberti Prize. It is an honor for me to be worthy of such a distinction, and it is a pleasure to be present once again here in Tucumán, the land of our greatest prophet and father of our first constitution, Juan Bautista Alberti. In particular, I want to recognize the Foundation for having supported me and provided a space of expression for so many years, even when we liberals were very few and defending freedom was considered an heresy. Today, in part thanks to the work done by foundations such as this one, Argentina has the first libertarian liberal president in the history of humanity. I also want to take this opportunity to reflect with you on three pillars that have been characteristic of our government: the power of truth, the power of macroeconomic order, and the power of freedom. Starting with what we call the power of truth. I follow a reason for which I became president despite not having governors, intendants, or media related to my background. This is because I have always preferred to say an uncomfortable truth over a comfortable lie. In fact, during the presidential campaign, all the mainstream media went against me, inventing endless lies and barbaries to try to scare me with their power. What they never understood is that, as a lesson says, veritas vincit, the truth always triumphs, because the lies at the beginning can walk, but they have short legs. And no matter how comfortable they are, sooner or later they end up failing and falling apart like a house of cards. In our country, we witnessed how a repeated lie, even a snitch in the media, made a citizen who ended up kicking everyone. Despite the operations against us, we won the elections thanks to the voice of the people on social networks, who answered with two truths for each lie. This is a very interesting issue, and we suffered in the campaign. In fact, I remember that the first advisor I had asked me if I had dead people on the ticket. I looked at my sister and said, "I don't think I have any dead people on the ticket." So she told me that during 2 months she was going to investigate me and I was going to look for the dead people on the ticket. After 2 months we had a meeting and she told me I had good news and bad news. The good news was that they hadn't found anything on me. The bad news is that since they hadn't found me anything, they were going to invent it. And so we had to endure a lot of lies throughout the campaign. All kinds of slanders, insults, threats. But the interesting thing was that every time they did an operation, at first it lasted a certain amount of time, and the next operation lasted less, and the next one less. And in the last phase we saw that the operation suddenly lasted, for example, hours. So in that sense, the truth is that the truth always triumphs. And as you said, Messias, I use the phrase of Virgilio, that you don't have to give up in the face of evil, but you have to face it with much more strength. I think we did that, and thanks to that we were able to get to this incredible situation, to have won the elections with massive support, Unfortunately, we can say that we are not defrauding because we are fulfilling each of the campaign promises. That is why, once in the government, we were faithful to these same principles. And we resisted battle after battle of journalists, politicians, and mercenary economists who tried to make us fall with lies. They said that we didn't pass the steps. They said that we didn't have structures. They said that we weren't going to be able to compete. They said that we were third. They said that we had lost the debate. They said that we weren't going to be able to govern. They said that adjusting more than 1 point of the GDP was impossible, that achieving the fiscal balance in the first year was impossible, that finishing with the pickets was impossible, that eliminating the privileges of the caste was impossible. They got tired of saying everything we proposed was impossible. But they never understood that with the truth was on our side, politics is not the art of the possible, but of making the impossible possible, and we are doing it. Second, the power of the fiscal order and of an orderly macroeconomy. So the second power I want to talk about is the power of an orderly macroeconomy and fiscal austerity. To understand where we were when we inherited at an inflation rate. In December, that was running at 1% daily, which annualized is 3,700%. By the second week of December, it had accelerated to such an extent that the annualized was already at 7,500%. And when he took the wholesale inflation rate, which is the one that is anticipated, the one that runs ahead, it reached 54% per month. That 54%, if you annualize it, that's 17,000%. And the reality is, one can say, does that extrapolation make sense? Well, it makes sense in so much as you have elements that enable that monetarily. So if you enable it monetarily, it can happen. So we would have to see what monetary problems we had at the time of assuming. In principle, where there is a type of fixed exchange rate and where, in addition, there is an unbalanced fiscal policy and money is emitted and prices are tried to be controlled, it generates a gap. The gap came to be at levels of 200%. That is, the difference between the type of official exchange and the parallel was a 3-to-1 relationship. But it was not only that problem, which was a way of showing the huge monetary surplus that we had. In fact, the first time I spoke about this was here at this foundation, here in Tucumán. In this same place, presenting a book called Economic Policy Against Clock. That is why it is strange to me that there is a stupid theme in the mainstream media that says that I arrived without a plan. I came more than 10 years ago saying what we have to do in Argentina, which is precisely what I am doing. In fact, the other day I saw that there was a tweet from a liberal called Ivan Corina. He was proposing what I was saying in that book. Because it is precisely what we are doing. So I did not hear what Ivan did, but I suppose that he was going to tell the book. But he said that we were already doing what was said there. And another thing, the surplus monetary that we had at the time of assuming office was the double of what we had under our 3 years. And now Rodriguez was a situation that made the inflation rate multiply by 6. That is, it came in at levels of 30%, it jumped to 180%. In addition, they also multiplied the poor by 5. If we take the last official data that there was a poverty, it had already lost its meaning. Because they no longer provided the numbers for a linear extrapolation of those characteristics. Because there is a limit, which is 100%. But we hit double that balance of L. Rodriguez. Therefore, there was already a subjacent inflation of 2,400, 2,500%. That, if the demand for money increased, there would have been the same. When you know you have hyperinflation or an inflationary acceleration of those characteristics, the demand for money would drop very strongly. In fact, in the hyperinflation of Alfonso, the demand for money reached 0.2% of the GDP. Therefore, let's say that this is also not the case. In fact, in the hyperinflation of Alfonso, the demand for money was going to be 0.2% of the GDP. Therefore, we did not put it in the calculation. But we knew that it could not happen, but it was going to happen. Not only did we have a problem then of tremendous monetary overhang, we implicitly had a multiply of 12 or 15 times the inflation rate. But we also had another problem, and that is that the previous government, all the pay passes who were on average 90 days, a week of assuming it passed in 1 day. Therefore, we could multiply by 5 the amount of money in 1 day. As if all is not enough, we had debt in pesos. Equivalent to $90,000 million. Therefore, in that context, imagine what it would have happened. Or if there was a default, or if there was an explosion of pesos that generated hyperinflation. If there was a default, we also had the problem of the import system, which was about $43,000 million and the trapped dividends. Therefore, we had a problem of more debts that the previous government generated, of more than $50,000 million net negative international reserves. Therefore, if we, instead of behaving like libertarian liberals, if we had acted on recommendations, which is many of those idiots who claim the label of liberals, opinions that would have set fire. Let's look at the country. Without going further, the greatest stupidity was said by the idiot of Chope, where he said, no, the easiest thing was to close the central bank. And he forgot that, of course, as he lacks knowledge of monetary theory. He did not realize that monetary passives, if you do not honor them, are worse era. That means that the price level goes to infinity, that is, hyperinflation. If we had had hyperinflation, which was what the outgoing government wanted, we would have fallen for the typical Peronist tactics, with the parties generating looting and so on. And in January, the Kirchnerism would return forever. Or at least having discredited liberal ideas. Therefore, sometimes one is not free to leave aside the restrictions that one faces. Therefore, with all these elements that were there to enhance the evolution and feed the ride in prices, 17% is reasonable to say. But not only that, we also faced a fiscal imbalance of 15 points of the GDP. Five in the national treasury and 10 in the central bank, with the aggravating factor that the 10 of the central bank generated endogenous emissions. We understand inflation as a loss of the purchasing power of money. We consider that inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon generated by an excess of money supply, either because the supply rises, because the demand falls, or both things happen at the same time that generate a loss of the purchasing power of money, and therefore the prices rise. Under that situation, what we had to do was to cap the monetary emission, and to cap the monetary emission that the previous government had emitted. To finance deficit by 13 points of the GDP, we had to cut the fiscal deficit. I remember that when I said that we were going to adjust the treasury 5 points, they said that it was impossible, that no one could see that there was no way to do such a thing, that in no way could it be done. At best, a point per year could be lowered. In fact, the International Monetary Fund, which agreement with, did not think we would reach the goals of adjusting the treasury 5 points. And in fact, they could not believe that we were proposing an adjustment of 5 points at the GDP for the year 2024. And there, with the courage of all my team, and especially those led by Toto Capito, and the central bank, commanded by Santiago Borsali, we began this work of ending with the fiscal deficit. And already in the first month of the fiscal year, we had already reached the goal of ending with the fiscal deficit, and already in the first month of the fiscal year, we reached the fiscal balance. First, they told us that it was because we were lying about the numbers. Then they said it was transitory. Then that at some point we were going to give up. That later they were going to take us on. I am going to confirm that in the year 2024, Argentina will close with fiscal balance. In the financial line, that is to say that what seemed impossible, we made it possible. And the huge and talented man whose law is Toto Capito, who was criticized and despised so much since we took over, was elected the best minister of economy in the world. We did it. On the other hand, our firm commitment to fiscal policy and budgetary balance allowed us to gain confidence in the markets. I remember that when we lowered the country risk from 3,000 to 1,900, and the point is that the fiscal balance and the financial line makes one not have to take on debt. And if one does not have to assume that, when the GDP grows and population grows, the debt-product relationship is decreasing and therefore one is solvent. And that allowed two things. Not only that today the country's risk is below the 700 basic points, specifically it is 665, but also that the situation allowed us to clean up. The balance sheet of the central bank, and while everyone said that we had to raise the interest rate, which would have led us to a much more explosive situation. In times of remunerated passives of inflation expectations, and therefore they would have been talking about the carry trade every day if we had been stuck in a no-win situation. We were convinced that the interest rates were not the mechanism for making monetary policy. We were convinced that what had to be done was to control the amount of money, and for that we had to close the fiscal deficit and lower interest rates. And the most interesting thing about all this is that over the months we were able to begin cleaning up the balance sheet of the central bank. And in 6 months we finished cleaning up the balance sheet of the central bank. It means that in 6 months of government we made an adjustment of 15 points of the GDP. That is, we made the biggest fiscal adjustment in the history of humanity. And that translated into a fall in the inflation rate. The wholesale inflation rate last month was 1.4%. That is, we went from traveling to 17,000% to traveling to just over 50%. But not only that, if you consider that we have a 2% growth impact, an international inflation that gives you about 2.5% per month. It means that Argentina today, if it were not for the induced inflation, Argentina would have a monthly inflation of 1%. But not only that, because you could say, well, I don't care about the wholesale inflation, I care about the consumer inflation. Well, the consumer inflation, according to the latest data, was 2.4%, almost in line with the induced inflation. But the reality is that that number is contaminated. Why? Because we are recomposing rates. So what happens? When you look at the inflation in goods, it was 1.6%. And the services very impacted by the adjustment of rates was 4.4%. Therefore, let's say there is a part of the inflation that is explained by the tariff recomposition of the disaster that we did, breaking down regulated companies. Therefore, inflation would be traveling to 1.6%. And if the rest is induced, it means that we are also in an age of inflation of 0.9%. That is to say, today Argentina travels at a rate of a monthly 1% deflation. That is 13 daily, 13 annual. That is to have an order of magnitude of what we did. If one takes in terms of food, it is less than 1%. And if it takes it in terms of the basic fruit basket, it is a little more than 1%. And if it looks at it in terms of total basic basket, let's say it is around 1.4%. This means that given the growth that wages have been sharing, since the economy hit bottom in March or April, we see that real wages are not only growing because wages earn them at the level of prices, but also in terms of poverty and indigency. We are obtaining very important results. So the point is, and how does it go with poverty? I do not know if you are aware, but today DESO is published from a study carried out on the basis of the index methodology by the institute that looks at the problems of distribution of income at the University of La Plata and that are aligned with what the UCA calculated and that today a Ministry of Human Capital reported the poverty of the first quarter that was at 54.8%. The date of poverty that was known today is 38.9%. And the indigency that in the first quarter was 20.2% today fell to 8.6%.
Y la indigencia, que en el primer trimestre era del 20,2%, hoy cayó al 8,6%.
It is to say that even having made the biggest tax adjustment in the history of humanity,
Es decir, que aún habiendo hecho el ajuste fiscal más grande de la historia de la humanidad,
and they said that the level of economic activity was going to be destroyed. The recession ended between March and April.
entre marzo y abril,
From there, the economy is expanding at a rate of 10% per annum.
ritmo del 10% anual,
When they take the GDP of the third quarter, it expanded 3.9%.
el PBI del tercer trimestre se expandió 3,9%.
That is to say that the economy has been expanding at a rate of 17% per annum. They said that inflation was falling because consumption was deteriorating,
Que se destrozaba el consumo,
and consumption has been growing at a rate of 20% per annum.
20%
They said that there would be no investments, and investments are growing at 50% per annum.
al 50%.
Therefore, we have demonstrated that the best way to get people out of poverty,
Hemos demostrado que la mejor forma de sacar a la gente de la pobreza,
the best social plan to get people out of poverty is to exterminate inflation
la gente de la pobreza es exterminar
and grow again from the fiscal balance and an orderly monetary policy.
del equilibrio fiscal y una política monetaria.
Therefore, what they said that it could not be done,
Eso que decían que no se podía hacer
we are doing it possible in 3 trimesters because they are data from the third quarter.
trimestre, porque son datos del tercer trimestre.
But not only that,
Nos-
one may look at history. There is a wonderful work of 3 economists,
Nosotros
Girardi de la Pavlera, Balsauli, and Griggrain, which is called Pass in the Back.
hay un trabajo maravilloso
What it does is take the macroeconomic pressure index developed by Barrows.
Paulera, Bossoli e Irigoyen, que se llama
If I tell them that a hair got into my eyes, they will believe me for sure.
es tomar el índice
The management has given me less hair, but I still have a lot. And basically, it applies the macroeconomic pressure index
del seguro, pues.
of Barrows, and with that it compares all the governments in the history of Argentina. And the government of Menem, the first government of Menem, was the best government in history.
Presión macroeconómica.
And when one takes the first government of Menem, or if they want to take the full period of Menem,
Compara todos los gobiernos de la historia argentina.
the first government of Menem,
Y el gobierno de Menem, el primer gobierno de Menem fue el mejor gobierno de la historia.
and when one takes the first government of Menem, or if they want to take the full period of Menem,
Quieren tomar el periodo completo de Menem.
I say because the second was third in the ranking, do not believe that it was far behind.
Que quedó muy atrás.
The Menem program had 2 characteristics.
Dos características. Tenía
It had a stabilization program that was the convertibility plan,
el plan de convertibilidad,
and it had a set of structural reforms.
punto de reformas estructurales.
If we look at the numbers that we are attaining today,
Miramos los números que estamos obteniendo hoy,
we are attaining aligned numbers in terms of time dynamics.
números alineados en términos de dinámica de tiempo.
Although we start from above, today we are at the levels of the months.
Hoy estamos en niveles a los meses corridos
That had the convertibility,
de la convertibilidad.
but we achieved this without a previous hyperinflation,
Lo logramos sin que hubiera una hiperinflación previa.
such that the real balance sheets were liquefied if the stabilization was easier. We achieved this without expropriations because there was no Bornex plan. The solution of the balance of the central bank was done by markets.
Se hizo por vías de mercado en la medida
In the measure that lowered the interest rate is phenomenal work.
bajo fenomenal
That was coordinated between the president of the central bank, Santiago Bosso, and his team,
y ese
and that huge professional that we also have in the Ministry of Economy, which is Pablo Carr,
Pablo Kirno,
but with which we also solved the problem to the market.
con lo cual nosotros además resolvimos el problema a mercado.
which is no less and less for us, let's say as liberals, the issue of respect for the right to property. On the other hand, unlike other stabilization plans, the first thing they did before announcing the plan, they recomposed rates. And they reset rates basically to later show a jump in inflation. And later, when the stabilization plan began, they told people that even if the inflation went down less, I never contemplated something like that. But I'm going to be honest, I didn't have an alternative to do it differently. That is, we acted quickly, we were in position. But that's why it's funny when they say we didn't have a plan, because if we hadn't had a plan, we would have crashed and burned. But that's not all. Unlike other programs, especially the convertibility, we don't look at the type of change and we don't look at prices controls either. And notice that this is interesting. In other words, we didn't control prices and we didn't look at the official exchange rate either. And if we were to clean up the induced inflation today, we would be in deflation. That is, that our program is better in terms of stabilization than the convertibility that had been the most successful economic program in Argentine history. But not everything ends there, because Menem's government made structural reforms. And we, only with 15% of the deputies and 10% of the Senate, and now I'm going to thank all those who are not from the advanced freedom and who strongly supported us, such as Governor Hald and Governor Jalita. He might thank enormously. Or the governors who belong together for the change and for the work that the deputies have done in this. We made the biggest structural reform in Argentine history. We made a structural reform 8 times bigger than Menem's, which is the essence of the DNU 70 plus the basic law. Therefore, I have no problem in affirming that we are the best government in Argentine history. Also, I want to recognize the fundamental contribution of the pro-bloc of deputies, who also worked a lot with us, helped us a lot. It is led by Christian Ritono, who is now a victim of operations and persecutions, precisely for helping us and collaborating. Although we have started from different spaces, today we are getting closer and closer to this ideological reorganization, of which I have spoken of for so many years. I have always said that politics owes Argentines an ideological reorganization, that on the one hand, they are the ones who defend the ideals of freedom, and on the other hand, the collectivists, those who are willing to defend the ideals of freedom. We are going to embrace them, and we are going to join with all those who want to defend the right to life, to liberty and to property. Because by embracing the ideals of freedom, Argentina will be great again. In this sense, there is also the recognition of the increasingly large group of radicals. We, over the months, have been adding to this reformist project that came to change Argentina. I am sure that society will recognize those who supported the change unconditionally, those who sought excuses to scrutinize it. What gives me the strength to speak of the third power? This is the power of freedom, in all its forms, with all the reforms that we have made. Argentina rose by about 70 positions in the economic freedom ranking in less than a year.
Argentina ascendió cerca
Why is this important?
en el ranking de libertad económica en menos de un año.
Why is this important?
¿Por qué es importante?
When we defended the ideals of freedom,
Recurrentemente, cuando defendemos las ideas de la libertad,
we were always being asked, well, how does it work?
bueno, ¿y cómo funciona?
And we know epistemologically that some accounts are good on paper,
Epistemológicamente que algunas cuentas quedan bien en el papel.
but later in real life they are more complicated. But it is a good inference of the effects of the ideals of freedom.
Inferencia de los efectos de las ideas de la libertad
To see the indexes of economic freedom, and they one sees that there's countries that are free,
más libres
are 12 times richer than those repressed in terms of income per capita.
de ingreso per cápita.
In addition, they have 25 times less poverty in the standard format,
O estándar
50 times less in the extreme format.
en el formato extremo.
Therefore, embracing the ideals of freedom had to be a big deal.
Tenía que ser un gran negocio.
That is, there is no more powerful mechanism to get people out of poverty
Gente de la pobreza,
and to progress than embracing the ideals of freedom.
hacer las ideas de la libertad.
But of course, it has the resistance of those who live off the state for free.
Gente no sea libre.
And not only have we claimed 70 positions in terms of economic freedom,
Solo que hemos escalado 70 puestos en términos de libertad económica.
we went from being in the quintile of the worst 35 to being in the middle quintile.
Pasó a estar en el pelotón medio.
And obviously for us this is not enough.
No es suficiente.
That is why, on the one hand, I have a colossal minister of deregulation,
Tengo a un coloso de ministro de desregulación,
he was Dr. Federico Sturzenegger,
Dr. Federico Sturzenegger,
who has basically made a computer that takes out some regulations at a rate of 1.8 per day.
quien básicamente le hicieron un cómputo de que saca unas regulaciones a un ritmo de 1,8.
But the reality is that they did their interns computing in annual terms,
La realidad es que lo hicieron en términos, computando en términos anuales,
and Federico's ministry started in the middle of the year.
a mitad del año.
Therefore, it takes out about 4 regulations a day,
Regulaciones por día,
which ups the lower costs, make us more competitive, and increases freedom.
competitivos, a ganar libertad.
And we also have 3,200 structural reforms pending. Therefore, my commitment is that when I leave power in Argentina,
Que cuando yo deje el poder en la Argentina,
Argentina will be the freest country in the world.
más libre del mundo.
At the same time, the power of economic freedom was evidenced very quickly,
Económica quedó evidenciado muy rápido.
even by approving the incentive regime for large investments.
Las grandes inversiones,
The announcements of investments in the country were rapid. Notice that we already have requests from Ricky for about $15 billion,
cerca de 15.000 millones de dólares.
and announcements in terms of $60 billion. And to think that there were some who said that this was not going to work.
Esto no iba a funcionar.
Precisely those who destroyed capital,
Destruyeron el capital.
and those who also dare to destroy the capital.
Usar el capital.
Therefore, this was the boldest proof that when the state gets out of the middle
Se corre del medio.
and stops biting where it does not belong,
Responde,
trade and prosperity flourish by generating employment where there was none before. In fact, they said that we were going to generate a brutal unemployment. The latest unemployment data is DRPP and real salaries are growing. When we came into offer, the basic salary was $300,
básico era de $300.
and today it is $1,100. The latest data shows that the unemployment rate fell to 6.9%.
9%.
The truth is that I don't know how the Keynesians, the structuralists,
Los estructuralistas,
the neo-Keynesians, the heterodox, and all that bunch of beasts
manga de bestias que
who live ruining the lives of the Argentines for almost 90 years live at themselves.
que bueno,
I imagine they will burn their credentials or become liberals.
liberales.
And this is extremely important because it allows us to see that the future of Argentina will be bright if we continue on this path.
permite vislumbrar
I am going to tell you, and I promise that I will come out of this speech,
si seguimos por este camino. Les voy a contar
and again, and I will not come out anymore.
que me salgo esta vez del discurso.
Days ago, I was lucky enough to talk to a series of brilliant economists,
Días atrás tuve el
and within those brilliant economists, I was lucky enough to talk to
estas brillantes y dentro de esos economistas
Professor Juan Pablo Nicolini, doctor of the University of Chicago.
suerte de hablar con el
At some point, he was the rector of the teller.
doctor de la universidad.
That is, he assumed his rector, and I was returning from my master's degree.
O sea, él asumió
And remit because he published an article that was very interesting to me.
maestría y
Where he showed that using a series of structuralists,
un artículo que me resultaba muy interesante donde mostraba que utilizando
using a series of mathematical structures designed by Robert Lucas Jr.,
de estructuras matemáticas diseñadas por Robert Lucas Jr. que
may he rest in peace, he showed that Argentina, achieving fiscal balance,
usando el equilibrio fiscal
could grow systematically by 4.5% annually.
4,5% anual.
For example, in basically 10 years, we can raise our GDP
Básicamente 10 años podemos subir nuestro PIB per
by 50%.
30%.
Not only that, but then we started talking about the situation in Argentina.
Sobre la situación de Argentina.
The part we talked about Argentina was the shortest part. Then we dedicated ourselves to discuss economic theory, especially about Keynes.
Acerca de Keynes.
But apart from that, the interesting thing is that what Professor Juan Pablo Nicolini mentioned to me
Es que lo que me mencionaba el profesor Juan Pablo
was that was fiscal balance, only fiscal balance.
solo equilibrio fiscal.
This means that there was no distinction.
Una distinción
If this was based on adjusting spending or raising taxes,
a ajustar el gasto o subir los impuestos.
and we liberals know that this difference is fundamental,
La diferencia es fundamental.
because the Soviet Union could also have balance, but there was no freedom.
Libertad.
So it means that due to the type of adjustment we made,
Que por el tipo de ajuste que nosotros hicimos,
where basically the biggest part was in the financial system,
básicamente la parte más grande fue en el sistema financiero,
where the banks did not work as banks.
donde los bancos no trabajaban de banco
They took the money from the private sector to give it to the state.
al Estado.
Therefore, they did not work as banks. They were accomplices of a thief, which is the state.
Ladrón que es el Estado.
But not only that, but also what has to do with the adjustment in the treasury.
Tiene que ver con el ajuste en el tesoro.
That adjustment at the treasury, which involves an adjustment of 5 points.
Significa un ajuste de 5 puntos,
It was more than 5 points, it was 7 points.
7 puntos.
And the differential we apply to give contention to the most vulnerable
Aplicamos para dar contención a los más
and recompose the pensions.
las jubilaciones.
In fact, today the pensions are above, in real terms, are the pensions that we received in 2023.
2023
And also, if they take it in dollars, it is more than doubled.
duplicaron.
But not only that,
No solo eso, sino que además
the previous government
el gobierno anterior se
was celebrating its poverty program,
atención a los pobres
and between the Freed card and the EUH, it covered 50% of the basic food basket.
la básica alimentaria.
And we, thanks to the task and the enormous work of the Minister Sandra Petervolo,
La labor enorme de la ministra Sandra Petovelo,
today we cover 100% of the basic food basket.
de la canasta básica alimentaria.
That's why I shouldn't be surprised that the number of homeless people in Argentina
Por eso no debería sorprender que la cantidad de indigentes
has gone from 20% to just over 8%,
a poco más del 8%.
because it was precisely a deliberate plan
Fue un plan deliberado
of the economic team and obviously of Minister Sandra Petervolo, who also, as if all this was not enough, with a joint action with Minister Boric and then Minister of Infrastructure, Tairo and Guillermo. We also managed to end something that seems impossible in Argentina, and that is to end the pickets and the manager of poverty. At the same time, to be clear, we seek to free trade because we see trade as a peaceful tool that turns enemies into clients and competitors into collaborators. Tariffs draw borders and unites peoples into enemies. Trade makes the client decide, and thus it submits the companies to healthy competition, in which the inventive and the collective discovery process prosper. In effect, they end up generating wealth and getting people out of poverty. Now, I swear this is the last one, which is something from the libretto. Well, we are a government that, if you notice, I made a report with Susana Jimenez, and in a moment, Susana Jimenez asked me how we're going to go, if we were going to go out, what reflection I could leave. And I told her, to not that from now on only good news comes. Well, what I did not imagine was that there are so many per day. And a few days ago, I had a meeting the presidency of Marcosia. The pro-temporary presidency. And there I raised 3 questions for Marcosia. One there has to do with that we work together against drug trafficking and terrorism. And 2 questions in terms of trade. That we lower what has to do with Marcosia itself. That we lower the common external being. And that we eliminate the barricades. Because the truth is that as it is in Marcosia, a lot was not working. But there is a third line, which I think is the most important. And it is that I am proposing that the member countries can negotiate independently free trade agreements with other countries in the world. And in that sense, I have said that we are going to work in Argentina to achieve a free trade agreement with the United States. And this, which seemed like a chimera, today, one of the men he works with, Donald Trump, said that he is on board with the agenda to advance freedom with Argentina. And it is for this very reason that the truth is that it is not enough to climb 70 positions in the Economic Freedom Index. And that is why we want to become the freest country in the world, because we want to have a free trade agreement with the United States, with the United States, with the United States. And we want to become the freest country in the world, so that the capital moves freely in our country. And we are an example of prosperity and growth for posterity. And in fact, to achieve this, we have 3,200 pending reforms for the next 2 years. That is, do not have doubts. We are going to be the freest country in the world. Naturally, returning freedom to Argentines is not without costs and risks, because it necessarily implies taking away privileges and benefits of politics to its friends and to its customers. That is why we propose an increment adjustment on public spending, and this has been reflected in all government agencies. My most watched video in the world is which one? Art. In fact, we cut the number of ministries that were in 18 to 8. We eliminated secretaries, subsecretaries, directives. We eliminated organizations that were dedicated, for example, to ideologically persecute those who did not agree with the left, such as the Ministry of Women or the INADI. Because if they really want to end up with the feminists, they do not fix themselves with little songs and platitudes. They fix themselves by applying the law. And that is how we eliminated the public sector. We eliminated the transfer of discretion to the provinces. Not only that, but we lowered the number of public employees. We eliminated the contracts they won, and those who did not have a specific task. We lowered the salaries of the employees. In fact, since we took office, we have not been able to pay our salaries. We have not increased our salary when we could have done it, and not as they did in the Chamber of Senators. Quite a different situation with what happened in the Chamber of Deputies, where Deputy Martin Menem, President of the Chamber, applied a large number of cuts that only provided benefits and privileges to politicians that do not help people, but that only enrich politicians. That we also ended up with a job that everyone knew existed, except for people, which is the job of the fiduciary funds. We eliminated more than 15 fiduciary funds. And we also eliminated a lot of political boxes from the same time we assumed office. And we continued every day, eliminating deficit wells and regulations of all kinds, although those who live in those boxes resist. All this, what was achieved, no matter how much antipathetic our first measures were, we have not lost a handful of support from the population, which changed the socialist mentality via true projection to the future, anchored in growth. And here I want to stop to talk about you. As I highlighted a while ago, at the beginning of the presentation, the role of foundations, such as this one in the cultural battle, that we give day by day in, because the ideas of freedom spread. In fact, we say that we work in 3 ways. We work in the way of management. We work in the way of politics. And we work in the cultural battle. And we understand that the cultural battle is fundamental and is important as the other 2. If you don't look at the left, always being in a place, an impoverishing and murderous phenomenon, because we never forget that they killed 150 million human beings for that stupid idea. However, they have been politically successful because they won the cultural battle. And when the wall fell in 1989, when in reality, the real fall of a socialist system applied to its extreme in real life. In reality, it fell one they had to build it in 1961. When first it was only some fences, some wires and so on. And then the wall was finished. The reality is that if with that history and that track record so scary, they were successful. Look at everything we could have done if we had engaged a cultural battle. Therefore, we are deeply committed to the cultural battle because we know how to manage, how to generate wealth. We are waking up politically, and if we give the cultural battle its due, we will have without a doubt 100 years of liberalism, and Argentina will soon be a world power. That's why there are a series of videos that are about me, and it's very interesting because my first television appearance is from 2014. It's here in Tucumán. It's here in this place, invented by this foundation, and in the background, incredible. It was prideful, and it said starting point. That is to say, if the foundation of federalism and freedom hadn't invited me to speak so many years ago, my presidency wouldn't exist today. Thank you, Foundation of Freedom, Federalism and Freedom. Thank you. Not only was federalism and freedom my starting point, they also gave me the award for the defense of freedom, and today they gave me the award for the green. Thank you, you're exaggerating. Thank you. And that's why it's important that ideas continue to have these spaces that are able to restore the common sense, which seems to have nothing in common today, because the left, after so many years of possessing power, developed an arsenal of propaganda from which our ideas fell. Our ideas triumph, even with bad press, triumph even when 13 points of the GDP are issued to destroy it, triumph even when they try to silence us with ridiculous laws to control our freedom of expression, triumph when they try to lock us up in our houses by force, triumph when they raise walls to subdue us to their regime, triumph in every citizen standing who is answered by a journalist in networks that are lying, triumph in every entrepreneur that is forced to subdue him, because our ideas respond to the cheerful and strong spirit of our humanity, and they respond to the sadness of small souls who want to control and subdue the others in order to feel superior. And joy in the long run is always imposed on sadness. Not for nothing, my screen protectors many years ago identified joy has no end. Obviously, if you are a liberal, joy has no end because you understand how the world works. And when you understand how the world works, you become happy. Liberalism is also a way to happiness. Besides, did you see the life of the socialists? It's horrible. But well, they are based on envy, in hatred, in resentment, in the unequal treatment under the law, in murder. That's why they have grey lives. In fact, they are trash. They are inhuman. They are repugnant. That they feel sorry and lament that we are doing well. They cry because the inflation is falling. They cry because the GDP is rising. They cry because the real wages are rising. They cry because poverty is falling and the living conditions of Argentinians are improving, because their shitty ideas are being exposed. On the other hand, we also have to know that that these ideas have to be imposed, depend on us. That's why we can afford to sleep on our laurels. We have to take advantage of the winds in the air. We have to take advantage of the winds while they're in our favor. We have to take advantage of the winds while they're in our favor to raise the sails of liberalism and grow as we have never done. I'm going to tell you an anecdote. I said I wasn't going to deviate, but I think you're going to like it. In the last meeting as the cabinet that we had, I had planned to take the team. We had a set of staff that we continue to with some regularity, because you always have to know where the temperatures. Of course, I looked at the numbers, and all the numbers were incredible. Then I said, I just have to give them good news. Service is a danger. So what did I do? I have a chainsaw. Actually, I have several that they have already given me, but I have one. There was one that I have directly in my office in Costa Risada. So I did. As it is actually very heavy, I take it to the evaporation room, which is where we have the cabinet meetings. And I put it on the table where we met with the cabinet. When we were at the meeting, obviously they were arriving and they were surprised by the chainsaw. At one point we started, and when we started, I started to give all the numbers that we had. And the truth is that this is in terms of image, in terms of management, in terms of support for the different policies, and then a series of relevant reports to take into account where we were standing. So it was all good news. So I pointed out to that wonderful group of professionals who accompany me that above all things, they are also excellent people. I told them that we were like an football game winning 2-0. 2-0 is an extremely dangerous result. Because if you trust each other, you can turn the game around. Therefore, it was a moment of knife in the teeth, and to press strongly without stopping. And the way to put the leg stronger in this is with more chainsaw. And that's why, in this moment, not all in, Dr. AstraZeneca is working on the deregulations, but he is also working on what is called the deep chainsaw. That said, it has just been coupled by Japan. It has had the interest of Elon Musk and of Biden in the United States and of Donald Trump himself. In fact, Federico, I also put in contact with Giorgia Meloni the other day in the German parliament. They asked for a chainsaw to my law. And in the stage, we're going to what is the reform of the state, where we are not enough with the fact of having reached 8 ministries. We still want to reduce that structure and continue to advance in gaining economic freedom. And therefore, let's say, as I said before, the can't rest on our laurels. We have to take advantage of these winds and take advantage of them, because we also have winds in our favor. Therefore, planting today the seeds of a new world, thinking about what fruits we want our children and our grandchildren to collect. Remember that when we arrived, our children and our grandchildren, the only thing they thought about was to leave. Today they stay, and many are already coming back. How they have changed minds. That is why we need to form leaders and evangelizers who carry the idea of freedom to each corner of the country. How good was the name of the foundation if Federalism and Freedom, that is, they're taking it all over the country. Look at the vision of the future they had. And I ask a question, and why don't we think of taking it to the whole world? That is neither more nor less than making us prophets are the most precious good that we humans have, and that is freedom. In that sense, that is why we also pulse an international policy clearly defined. In fact, no one could say that during the campaign. I did not say what I was going to do. No, because in terms of fiscal policy, I said that I was going to pass was a bike, and it arrived. In monetary policy, I said that we were going to end the central bank with the central bank going through a currency competition regime, as they called it in television, but it is currency competition. And I don't know if you all were, but today in Argentina there is currency competition. You can make your transactions in whatever currency you want. Today not only you can bill in pesos, you can bill in dollars, or in whatever currency that you want. We are enabling currency competition. Therefore, every day we are closer to advance towards endogenous dollarization, and at the end of the day, to finish closing the central bank. But not only that, we had to fix the disaster that the cockroaches left us. Now you know, because the rate off that we made in the central bank was $45,000 million, and in the middle, we also bought $25,000 million. Kitcherism always suffocates. Then the debt goes down, and the debt went up. We lowered the debt to $35,000 million, while freedom is work. And also, in terms of security, we said that we were going to sweep our way in security. And while the Minister of Borage is doing a huge job, a phenomenal job, look at what happened was the flight plan in Rosario. Homicides went down by 70%. We said that we were going to end up the managers of poverty, and we ended up with the managers of poverty. While if the Minister of Borage works well, and in terms of international policy, we said that we were going to align with the United States and Israel, and that is what we actually did. And when the previous Chancellor in a vote voted in favor of Cuba, I was on the side of the whole world, and on the other side was the United States and Israel. That was not my policy. I did not have any attention in voting. My best friend, in 30 minutes, I removed the chancellor. Now I have another chancellor. Because we did not come here to be friends. Here we come to save Argentina by defending the ideas of freedom. And that is why it is so important. The defense and the role that Israel has to defend Israel and to stand on Israel's side. Because in the end, the foundations of free enterprise capitalism are in the Jewish culture. That is, those who study the Torah will see that the foundations are there. In fact, you have Weber's work about Protestant ethics, which is nothing more or less than rescuing from the sight of those who believe in Jesus Christ as the Messiah, but also rescuing the teachings of Judaism. And that is what those the foundation of our capitalist system. That is why Israel is not only attacked by its enemies in the region. Israel is continually attacked by the entire international left. Because they know that if they break Israel, they break the values of the West, and was up. Capitalism falls, and they will be able to advance their collectivist agenda. Therefore, beyond what they can accuse me of over my preferences, defending the cause of Israel is defending a just cause, because it is the cause of freedom. But we also have to know that there's still a long way to go, that they have been educating society for 80 years, so we have 80 years of disadvantage. The good things that we have, the Promethean fire on our sides, because they need us to survive, and we only need ourselves. That is why businessmen cannot be indifferent in this dispute. And no matter how much money we have to act actively. And the truth is that when they have to play, they play on the right side. I mean, not on the fiscal deficit and 13-point financial of the GDP. Therefore, because we have already learned that the cost of not getting involved is too high, and that any idea of a fiscal degenerate can be destroyed with our pockets. Therefore, and to finish, I invite you to put your hands to work, because what the caste is not going to do is to go to the houses, and you cannot pretend to go alone. I mean, they're going to fight with tooth and nail to hold their position that we are trying to knock down. We are faster. We are going to knock the socialist edifice down. Like I usually use a phrase, which is that you can go to an Argentina game and they go on the field and look at the color of the stands. It's fabulous. The songs, all the previous ceremonies, the pageantry. It's truly something. It's a show in itself. I mean, not at all. The most important sport show in the world is Boca River in Canchito Baco. It means the Argentines with football, we have a very particular mistake. And we also have the greatest football player of all time in history. Who is the greatest of all is Lionel Messi. And now, he put the ball in the middle, and the crowd can shout everything they want, everything. But you know what happens with the ball? It doesn't move. It doesn't move. I mean,
Es decir,
if you want to win the game, you have to go for profit. You have to put the shots. You have to put the bits in. You have to start kicking. It doesn't get fixed by kicking from the stands, and much less by throwing stones at their own people. That's why,
por eso,
although there has to be division of work, we have to understand that the cultural battle is not only in an office, in a desk,
en un escritorio, sino
but also in the field of politics.
hay que entrar
You have to enter and you have to play to win in the field.
en la cancha.
And in that sense,
En ese sentido,
what they have to do is get involved. And those who are dedicated, and we have to be in the offices,
digamos, a estar en los escritorios,
trying to understand the restrictions that
restricciones que
those who make decisions face. I remember that
enfrentan. Yo recuerdo que
in one of the dinners
de las cenas que
that I have in our levels with several friends,
amigos,
the table was always
digamos, la mesa siempre
headed by Professor Juan Carlos de Pablo,
de Pablo,
with whom I have always had an excellent relationship.
son excelentes.
And when
Cuando tuve
I have my conversion and I became anarcho-capitalist, because I still am anarcho-capitalist, don't forget,
una realidad
I have to face the reality. As it is, there are things that I don't like, and some I can change, others I can't. But I still am an anarcho-capitalist. I still think that the state is a criminal, violent organization that lives from a corruptive source of income called taxes. I consider that taxes are a remora of slavery, and that's why I work all day
para tratar de
to try to make the state more and more so that we gain more freedom. And
y
then
entonces
I began to have
yo empecé a tener
differences with the professor because I saw,
decía que
how could it be that such a brilliant guy seemed like he was a descendant of politicians when he had spoken
había hablado
with all the ministers of economy and the president of the central bank of at least the last 50, 60, 70 years. And then
y después
life armies,
encontró
and we had a much better bond than the one we had before.
teníamos antes,
And already being in a livers,
estando en un
one day
día
in front of the whole group
grupo
of friends
de amigos
that we got together to see operas in front of all of them. And I repeat this so that it is public already. I asked the professor of Pablo for forgiveness for having angered me at that moment, and I told him that that now I understood why he did,
le dije que tenía
why his analysis
por qué
seemed contemplative. It is not that they seemed contemplative when one is focused on the city. When one is sitting in the electric chair, there seems to be many more restrictions than those seen from outside, and that also has a reflection
una reflexión
that is brilliant,
porque
because it says, what happens? He really are a genius that sees a problem. I mean, the first question is, why do you think that mild Capito and Busleys are so stupid that they don't see it? That would be the obvious first question. You think they don't see it, but we suppose that you are genius, that you actually see it, they don't see it. Then at some point, that will be known. It will come to light. Then
entonces
I say, what do you think
creen que puede hacer
these three can do
estos tres
in the moment
en el momento
that
que
appears
descubran que
that there is a problem?
bueno,
Well, the first one is,
no sé, se van,
I don't know, they leave.
no está,
It is not in the character of these gentlemen,
señores, no está,
clearly, because if not, they wouldn't have grabbed this hot potato. And once you know,
una vez que se
what do you think they're going to do? Decide not to do anything?
hacer nada,
Or are they going to do something? And yes, they are going to do something. Then, the point here
el punto acá
is to understand that one takes
toma decisiones.
decisions with many restrictions, and that sometimes
No es que uno
it is not that one does not see the situation. What happens is that you have to contemplate a set of restrictions that when one is sitting in the electric chair, it is bigger. Even so, again, we did more than what all the previous ones did in more than 23 years. If not, look at the question. If there is something that is fundamental, it is the fiscal balance. And in the first month of government, we reached the balance in the treasury at 6 months in the consolidated. And Argentina, in the last 123 years, had deficit. In 113, that did not have deficit. It is because it did not pay the interest of the debt, because it was in default. Therefore, look at if we are breaking the limits of what was considered possible. That's why what I suggest is that we get involved, that we fight. And for those who decide a position in the battlefield, if not in the trench, as one prefers to do it, from a different place, because not all people have the same preferences and the same talents, and those who take it from the desk understand that what we are in the battle, we have some distractions additionally, without more or less than all this. Have a very good night, that the forces of heaven accompany you, and Viva Libertad Carajo. Thank you very much.